Hi, drummer Snappy Smith again, lesson 6 of the couch series, and in this we're going to be continuing on with the finger control book with Roy Burns and Burns Malin, and of course in lesson 5 we worked on the no bounce exercises. So continuing on, we're going to be doing the bounce exercises, and I think this is probably the most important kind of part of what you learn from Freddie Gruber. It kind of starts tying your wrist and your bouncing exercises all together, and this book was really used in conjunction with the Buddy Rich book. So a lot of what you develop in the finger control book is really instrumental in proper execution of the rudiments and exercises in the Buddy Rich book. So in this main introductory section of the bounce exercises, Freddie kind of laid out some kind of really good preliminary exercises to develop and kind of set up your hands as you moved into the regular bounce exercises he would use. Here's another page, and this really kind of leads you into what I think would be the kind of consummation of all that Freddie taught, which was using the system. And so maybe we'll get into that in future lessons. But to focus on this right now, the bounce exercises or bounce studies in this book, these preliminary exercises started out like this. Now, so the left hand, again, holding the stick, the crotch of your left thumb, this being your main pivot point or fulcrum, and getting a good bounce out of that. So there's a good open bounce. Turning your hand, turning your wrist. So that was part 1. Now part 2 is you close your third and fourth finger and continue bouncing. Then part 3, opening these up, and now you're going to create what he called a fulcrum loop. So basically it's the thumb and the I guess forefinger here create kind of a loop, and this acts to propel the stick. So rather than the stick just coming off of here, now we're going to use these. This is kind of what will be your fingers motivating the bounce. So now these fingers are open, and now we've got more a bounce. But your index finger and thumb now are propelling the stick more. And finally, you close these third and fourth fingers again, so you've got your complete grip on the stick doing your bounce. So again, step 1, close the third and fourth fingers. Now we're moving into this, and then closing things up. And I think one good way to exercise this would be at different speeds. So this being a more open, slower tempo. 1, 2. And maybe going to triplets. So if you're closing the fingers up, you're going faster. So with the right hand, similarly, we have, of course, your main pivot or point is your middle finger, and the stick, of course, bouncing off of that. So same way, of course, you've developed your wrist motion, your no bounce exercises. So it's really key with the right hand that the wrist kind of gets out of the way, and again, kind of keeping the forefinger off it. We're not going to really use that yet. It's mainly, for me, it's bouncing off the middle finger, the kind of the fleshy part between your first and second joint there, and the thumb. So you kind of get this kind of loop here. So the thumb is helping to kind of press the stick against that middle finger, so you've got a good kind of pivot point here. And it's just from that, and the wrist kind of riding along with it. So you start with that, and then he wants you to kind of permit your index finger now to kind of come in line and close up on it. So you get this real open kind kind of fundamental bounce, and then you can now close this up and your fulcrum up and tighten up a little bit on it. So eventually you're getting everything moving together. The fulcrums, the index finger and the thumb have moved up, kind of holding the stick again, but you're pivoting off that middle finger, and you're getting a good bounce. So that's the main, what he would call fulcrum wrist bounces. So this is the important part of his development, was getting you to doing your fulcrum wrist bounces. So you're turning from your wrist, pivoting around from your fulcrum, and you've got a good bounce. And again, this is all done in conjunction with and coordinated with the Buddy Rich book. So as you're getting your fulcrum wrist bounces and getting that technique developed, you're moving into your paradiddles and your rudiments and exercises like that, and applying that kind of a technique to those exercises. Basically the exercises here again are pretty simple. They're just doing groupings. You know, slowly going longer. And again, all through the book, he's always emphasizing, you know, get your left elbow in on your left hand. You really want to, I think if you watched Buddy Rich play, he almost had his elbow in front of him. So you really got that alignment and got that. And then, of course, the right hand, you know, it's hard to believe, but the more you get your elbow out, it really does help your alignment and your positioning, and for you to get a good positioning with your fingers and your wrist. So progressing on here, then we get into, well, this is kind of now we're progressing into, now you got your fulcrum wrist bounces. Okay, now how do we move from that into fingers? So I had mentioned this kind of da-dum exercise that we did in lesson 5. Again, kind of going through that again here as kind of a setup for getting into using your fingers. With the left hand, it was using your kick fingers to kick up and basically getting into that. So now as you turn kind of a fulcrum wrist bounce, you're actually getting yourself ready to do a kind of it's kind of like a one finger stroke, because you're kind of pulling down from your fingers, but allowing you to bounce up. And the same with the right hand. Now with the right hand, as it comes down to your fulcrum wrist bounce, you're going to do one bounce and then kind of use your fingers to snap it up, and you're going to squeeze your fingers up. So it's bounce and squeeze. So left hand using your kick fingers, right hand you're squeezing it up. And that squeeze can actually give you a nice accent if you really snap it. So you see how we're using the fingers for that second stroke. So then we go into like a double bounce. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So those are kind of the da-dum exercises that he had you go through here. Again, with the left hand, always emphasizing keeping these fingers tight down, because you don't want them to kind of interfere with the bounce, at least not initially. And So another thing with this fulcrum wrist bounce is that you can really let it ride up into your arm. So it's not just an isolated, wrist movement. You really want to allow it, and this is another reason for the elbow to be out. You really want it to ideally ride up into your arm. So as you're bouncing, it actually can come from here. So here we are from the elbow up, coming down. So wrist bouncing, going into your arm. So I think that's kind of demonstrating the ideal what you can really do with what we call wrist bounces, or allowing the bounce to really ride all the way up and allowing your arms and your wrists to really accommodate that, so you can really make the most out of it. And of course, this is where you get your accents from. And you would see Buddy Rich come from here all the time. He's able to come right down, with these great. Great stuff to develop. Get that stick bouncing, have the position right, and really allow it, really get your arm involved so you can come up. So moving on with the book, as far as getting into your fingers, it's pretty straightforward here. You're coming down with your fulcrums. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And Freddie would have you just start and slowly move in from eighth notes to triplets to sixteenths, developing speed that way. So, each hand isolated. Something like that. You get the idea. But I think more than anything, the fulcrum wrist bounce and being able to ride that bounce up into your arms is a great thing to develop. You're going to use that much more, and that's going to have a much better influence on your drumming than really worrying about just playing for your fingers. Because that's just kind of a stationary thing. That's once you're getting that comfortable with bouncing and you're able to really feel the bounce of a stick, then that's just. But it's being able to ride that up, and that's going to influence your overall drumming around the kit much more. The only other thing to really mention here is that this book does get into bounce flam studies. And, of course, I had gone over flams in the Buddy Rich book, but what was really kind of interesting here was the way kind of Freddie mentioned using the squeezing and the kick fingers for flams. And at your grace note being kind of using your kick fingers to kind of come up like this. So your flam is. So now we're kind of doing flams with more of that wrist bounce kind of feel. And with the right hand, it's kind of a squeeze up. So here we are. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Squeezing with the right hand, kick fingers on the left hand. you should really be able to do that with, I think, any kind of rudiment. You should be able to amplify it, magnify it. You should be able to slow it down and be able to keep the same kind of relationship and feel, but everything becomes more enlarged. So I'm using the same amount of space. My arms are always moving. I'm not just going 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1. So it's the same thing that you're doing when you speed up. You're always using that space. You're always moving within your space, and that's really what the feel of drumming is all about. It's the expression of motion. I've always said that drumming is really the art of expressing movement. Because just like a dancer does the movement, but with drumming, it's a sound that expresses the movement. So the real key to having a great feel is people are feeling your movement. It's what you're doing in between the beats that matters, not the beat itself. The beat is just the result of the motion and the movements you're making. Anyways, enough said. That's the bounce, basic bounce exercises and the fulcrum wrist bounces that Freddie would teach. And again, that I think was a great influence to the overall approach to drumming that was applied in all his exercises. So that wraps up lesson 6. And for lesson 7, when I get around to it, I'm probably going to move into actually now what it would be considered the system, which really does come out of these fulcrum wrist bounces. So until next time, keep it snappy. Thanks. Bye-bye.